Fault Lines.
Live from the divided states of America, it is now time for another edition, another show of Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, the most disruptive show in American politics. On the West Coast and in the politically independent corner, I am your investigative political analyst and radio talk show host, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, ever vigilant, a burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together, burning in that darkness, we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And we're going into it. We have the headlines as we do every morning, 3 times, one at 7, one at 8, and one at 9 a.m. Eastern. After this first batch of headlines, we're going into Jamarl's monologue. And after that, we're taking calls. That's at about 15 minutes. So if you want to call in, you can. 202-521-1320 is the number. But without further ado, let's get into the headlines. In my first story this morning, Melania Trump reportedly used a private email account and other private messaging services, including the chat app Signal, while in the White House. This isn't really that big of a deal, but I'm seeing this played up in different places. And people are trying to draw parallels with Hillary Clinton and the sort of Clinton-gate email thing. We can come back to this and talk about this later, but that's the first thing. Also, Stephanie Winston Wolkoff, former assistant, reportedly secretly recorded conversations with the First Lady while she was around the First Lady. Again, she's being courted. We'll come back, more to talk about on this. In our next headline, the Trump administration has said that the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, plans to temporarily halt the evictions of consumers earning $99,000 a year or less to prevent the virus from spreading. That's according to a senior administration official. Yesterday, Fauci also said that people should be concerned about Labor Day. If you're going back in, as many will be, and resuming some degree of social normalcy, going out to parties, whatever, hanging out with people, that's also when the virus is going to spread. And so he's just cautioning people, if you hang out with folks on Labor Day, you should be safe. And our next story. In Los Angeles, police shot 29-year-old black cyclist Dijon Kazee more than 20 times in the back on Monday afternoon. That came after 2 sheriff's deputies reportedly tried to stop him for a bicycle code violation. That's according to Benjamin Crump, who is representing Kazee's family. The LA Sheriff's Department, meanwhile, says Kazee was shot less than 20 times after dropping a handgun he had been carrying and punching one of the deputies. In a kind of related story, in Kenosha, protests against the police killing of Jacob Blake police shooting of Jacob Blake, who was shot 7 times in the back, put into the hospital in critical condition, and apparently has stabilized, although is paralyzed from the waist down. Protests in Kenosha continued during Trump's visit to the city. While there, Trump did not meet with the family of Jacob Blake. Instead, a cousin of Jacob Blake's notoriously called for a new president. Apparently, Trump didn't meet with the family of Jacob Blake after they had requested a lawyer be on the call, and then he'd said that he wasn't willing to do it if a lawyer was on the call. I don't know. It doesn't look good for him, though. I'll just put it like that. And our next story, also on the election note, Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden is reportedly set to announce that his campaign raked in $350 million in August. That's breaking former President Barack Obama's record for campaign fundraising of $193 million from September 2008 during his first election. This also comes as Trump campaign has basically completely cut its TV ad spending, its TV ad budget, basically, with Biden outspending the Trump campaign on TV by 10-1. So again, that's an order of magnitude more ad buys, and you can see that. You watch TV, you've definitely seen that disparity. You also, of course, probably have seen it if you hang out on YouTube or other sites like that, where similarly far more ads for Biden I've seen than for Trump. Although, again, maybe that's down to just Google preferentially serving people different ads. Anyway, our next story. Yesterday marked the first day that Joe Rogan's podcast was out on Spotify. That's a result of Spotify's reported deal of over $100 million to buy the rights to Rogan's show for redistribution. The only catch here is that when the show's archives were posted live to the channel, some of the most controversial episodes were left out. It contradicts public statements from Rogan about the nature of the deal. Guests left out include Michael Shermer, Alex Jones, David Seaman, far-right figures such as Owen Benjamin, Stefan Molyneux, Milo Yiannopoulos, Gavin McInnes, Charles C. Johnson, Sargon of Akkad, as well as comedian Chris D'Elia, and a former guest on the show, Michaela Peterson, daughter of Jordan Peterson. Just interesting stuff. In our next headline, poll workers in Belarus say they were asked to falsify vote totals on August 9th, signing documents with falsified results and signing summary documents with key portions left blank so as to reportedly disguise fraud. This would add some evidence. This would confirm some of, at least for some people, confirm some suspicions that Belarus's elections were illegitimate, going into it with 80% of people in Belarus apparently voting for Lukashenko. Again, many people were lifting up their noses, wondering whether or not that was false. In our next story, another story that people are wondering if it's true or false, relating to the official narrative about Beirut's explosion. Protesters in Beirut actually tried to storm Lebanon's parliament. It came on the same day that the country celebrated the passage of 100 years since the declaration of Greater Lebanon by French mandate authorities. Also coincided with the visit of Emmanuel Macron. And again, this follows a massive suspicious explosion that gutted the capital's port, killed hundreds in that city, injured thousands, and knocked that government out of power. Again, this had followed years of sort of building civil unrest, and the government is basically out, and we're wondering what's coming next. And in my last but not least story this morning, airline pilots landing at LAX had a close interaction with a, quote, guy in a jetpack, end quote. It was reportedly seen about 300 yards off their wing on their descent into the airport, flying. The guy in the jetpack was flying at jet speeds at about 3,000 feet elevation. All right, Jamarl, what's your monologue today? What's the topic?
So, all of these people have gotten into their voter shaming phase, that they've chosen Joe Biden, and oddly enough, take the inverted perspective that it's not Joe Biden's responsibility to deal with the crises that we're being availed with, or for that matter, even pretend to. It is entirely your responsibility to get a candidate in office that has no intention, no belief that he's supposed to represent the interests of the public. One of the attacks that gets used against Donald Trump all the time, you hear it anytime you turn on MSNBC, you hear it anytime a Democrat opens their mouth. Donald Trump is not the man for the job. Well, fair enough. I agree. You have my entire and complete agreement. Donald Trump is not the man for the job. What on earth does that have to do with Joe Biden? And does that automatically make Joe Biden the man for the job? Now, my response is no, it does not. In the same way that Trump is being measured into whether or not he can deal with the crises that are availing us, well, Joe Biden has that same measurement standard. And up to this point, I am unaware of anything that Joe Biden has done, or, for that matter, anything he is doing right now to indicate that he should be the man for the job, to deal with the crisis, to ameliorate the concerns of America. Joe Biden recently gave a speech, which is, in my honest opinion, another testament that he doesn't know what he's doing, and he is not the person for the job. Let's play the clip of Joe Biden condemning the riots and condemning the protests.
The senseless violence of looting and burning and destruction of property. I want to make it absolutely clear, something very clear about all of this. Rioting is not protesting. Looting is not protesting. Setting fires is not protesting. None of this is protesting. It's lawlessness, plain and simple. And those who do it should be prosecuted. Violence will not bring change. It will only bring destruction.
If we're being perversely honest, violence does bring change. And whether it's good change or none or not, it does bring change. And if you get to the point where a government completely blows off the social contract, it is not insane for the public to do the same. Whether or not that's taking place here is somewhat secondary to that. I would agree that violence is not necessarily the best path forward. Agreed. I'm not a fan of the rioting. Agreed. By the same token, if Joe Biden is going to make this speech has to have context. The speech has to have depth. And it has to have it in a way that explains how we got to this point. Meaning, when Don Lemon was screaming, Joe Biden needs to give a speech, he needs to give the Obama speech. Don Lemon's complaint was that basically this was hurting him in the polls, not so much that this was an issue for, that this was necessarily bad in and of itself. Meaning, it's not so much that violence is taking place. It's not so much that people and houses or businesses are being burned down. It's not so much that this is indiscriminate. No, you need to get out there and say something because your polling numbers are going to be hurt. Here we have Joe Biden, King of Blacks, making a statement. I would have no problem with this speech if the speech was contextual. Meaning, if Joe Biden got out there and he made an argument basically saying, look, we have had centuries of violence, theft, looting, abuse for a particular generation and particular section of this population. Many of the people who are rioting or protesting are directly related to the conditions to which they were in, not necessarily the inciting incident. And considering that cops kill 1,000 people a year, you've reached a point of zero tolerance where the community that felt abandoned and alienated no longer believes that the social contract is looking out for their interests. As such, you get a response. Whether or not the inciting case is right or not becomes almost secondary to the fact that you get a response for all of the cases that were not elucidated. And yet, people died in silence. Or those cases went away in silence, with those people not being prosecuted and the victims, or the victims not necessarily getting any remuneration from the cops. I'm making the point, if you have the speech, you got to have the speech in a contextual way, especially if you are Joe Biden, King of Blacks, and you're not just reflexively responding to people screaming at you. You got to say something about it. You got to say something about it. Democrats love protests. Democrats love protests. Donald Trump doesn't go out there and say anything about people in this case. He backed up Rittenhouse, acting as if it's infinitely foreseeable that a child soldier goes and murders two people. But it's not infinitely foreseeable that a community under decades of poverty, decades of police abuse, decades of justice abuse, decades of economic abuse would not respond at some point in kind. I'm amazed by this. At the end of the day, you get a Democrat that goes out and condemns people who he wants to support him. You have a president who does not, whether they are child soldiers or whether they're people driving cars into protesters. Trump would never do it. He understands that's his base. Joe Biden can get cowed into doing this. I'm making the basic point that you can have the speech. You can have the speech condemning rioting. You can have the speech saying, I don't like people burning down businesses. But you have to make the argument correctly. Meaning you have to make the argument from context, not necessarily just reflexively based on what people are screaming at you about, especially if you're trying to pull the black vote to the tune of 90-something%. You also need to explain that some of the people out there are in predominantly white states, meaning they're not white, they're not black. I'm making the point that if you have this argument, and if you make this case, you need to make this case contextually, going back from the origins to some degree of this country, or at the very least into the 80s and 90s, and to the communities that produce adverse outcomes, what those adverse outcomes are, and why people will respond in such a way to those outcomes. You can't stick it at the end. You have to look at it from the precursors. And if you, Joe Biden, are giving a speech where you're not dealing with the precursors and the reasons why people were protesting, the reasons why people were rioting, that goes beyond the inciting incident, by the way. Meaning, you're talking about decades, centuries of abuse that goes unresponded to, and it takes a spark. And people who are comfortable have a tendency to look at the end result and say, oh, we don't like that. Not necessarily wanting to deal with the precursors that led up to it. The poverty, the violence, the policing. I went through and showed Kenosha, Wisconsin, the levels of poverty in Kenosha, Wisconsin, the levels of people put in jails and criminal abuse, and the lack of opportunity. And people are shocked. I'm saying don't be shocked. If you are not caring about what happens before in the various communities that are entirely alienated and entirely ensconced in poverty and violence, don't be shocked at the outcomes. I'm saying if you condemn one, you got to condemn both. And you can't do it in this kind of addendum afterthought way. Joe Biden can give the speech, fine. But Joe Biden needs to have a full-throated analysis and explanation of why these events taking place. That's not what happened. He is responding to political pressure. It gets to the point that Joe Biden is not the man for this time. He cannot address it. He cannot talk to it. And if anything, he is just trying to walk his way into the White House without really having to deal with any major issues. I'm saying whatever you want to say about Trump, Biden also is not the guy. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
Radio Sputnik.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. My name is Shane Stranahan. I am joined by my fantabulous co-host, Jamarl Thomas, and we're coming to you from across the country. If you guys want to catch us, we're on the air in DC, 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We are also on in Kansas City, 102.9 FM, 104.7 FM, and 1140 AM. Oh, and hey, if you want to catch us online, by your computer, by your tablet, whatnot, you can. We're on Spreaker. These are our audio options. Spreaker, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Apple Music, and Spotify. We're also on video, though. The best bet for video right now is for you to go to YouTube and search for Jamarl Thomas. You'll find his channel right there. You can also do a search for Fault Lines Radio. That'll take you to the official YouTube page for Fault Lines, the radio show. Over on twitter.com/faultlinesradio, you'll also find our Periscope feed up top. Okay, with that stuff out of the way, we're taking calls 202-521-1320. Jamarl, you're talking about Joseph Biden. And
Yes.
Joseph Biden's messaging and campaigning and policies, but I think you're also addressing, in a sort of abstract sense, just how a person would need to address Black interests and the history, I guess, of Black
Coming from the
Americans.
left.
I don't know if that's fair.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
Coming
Coming from the left,
specifically.
because it's one thing if Trump comes out. Trump is going to scream law and order. No expectation of anything else. Meaning Republicans, that's their angle. Look, I would make an argument that Republicans could change that angle to some degree, and even from a Republican standpoint, that argues opportunity and everything else. Well, you could argue that opportunity argument in a different way in order to try to get the Black vote. They don't do that. They argue law and order. Democrats, especially Biden, who was instrumental in that crime bill, especially Clinton, who was instrumental in that crime bill, if Joe Biden is trying to run and he's trying to have some kind of come to Jesus moment where he tries to say, look, I was wrong for the crime bill. He doesn't believe he was wrong for the crime bill. I can show you statements recently where he's saying, we wanted to keep crack out of these communities. Well, his son was a crackhead. His son didn't go to prison for all that time. His son got a contract making like $80,000 a month. I mean, for God's sake. So he gets up here and gives the speech after Don Lemon screams at him and say, you got to say something. And instead of him addressing the speech from a contextual standpoint, to try to kind of like what Obama would do. Obama wouldn't do anything about it, but he would do the speech that way, where he would say, these are the things that happened before as precursors. These precursors have outcomes that find themselves in explosions in various communities, however you want to put it. And then say, however, one does not justify the other. You can make that speech, and you can make that speech in a way that tries to give both sides of the communities, meaning the comfortable class, an explanation of why this is happening. By the same token, not necessarily accommodating the fact that it's happening. You can do that. That's called being a politician, right? What you don't do is come on here and give this speech reflexively because you want to push back against Donald Trump saying that you're okay with the rioters. That you don't do.
I think that, well, maybe one mistake here is that he doesn't, I don't know. I don't know what's going on in Joe Biden's head, and maybe he doesn't either. But there's this.
I don't think he cares.
Is he really trying to appeal?
I don't think
he really trying to appeal to Black voters, or is he trying to appeal to like performative white voters, or just performative voters in general?
It's performative.
That's the thing.
He doesn't want to be here.
Well,
he doesn't want to be doing this.
It's performative for him, but he's also, and this is again speaking as somebody who's a quote unquote centrist or whatever the heck I am. It's looking at the left. I see, and I'm not the left as such, but looking at people on the left, I do see a lot of performativism. I see a lot of people doing things not out of disingenuousness, but mainly for the political theater aspect, for the
Yes.
sort of implications of their having said something,
Yes.
where they say something as literally as a performance or as a political act, as a speech act, and the significance of them doing that is not for their genuinely held conviction there. It's just for the impact they see that having, either on their own reputation or whatever the case may be. And I don't know. In general,
Let's call it
performing
Democrats,
that crowd.
because I know what you're saying. But let's call it Democrats, because that's more like that's a Democrat Republican thing, if anything. I mean, like this, Joe Biden, he's a Democrat. Joe Biden's not on the left, and I know some right wingers would say Joe Biden is representing the left. Have you heard the left talk and go after Joe Biden? You would think they were Trump supporters. And so I don't think it's the left per se. I think it's Democrats. I think they try to give performative theater to try to tell the left that, hey, we're on the same team. But it's performative. And they can't give you anything real, so that's the best you get. In Joe Biden's case, I think Joe Biden doesn't care. I think Joe Biden just wants to be president. And so an issue comes up, and he's like, God, all right, give me a speech. And he goes on and gives a speech. And so there's no connection between what is taking place in real terms versus what he's saying about it. He's just saying whatever he needs to say about it to get people to leave him alone. Because he didn't say this until Don Lemon started screaming at him. Like he didn't care. And if you think back, even to the primaries, Joe Biden's entire political strategy was to coast. He wasn't going to get involved in any of the conflicts until it looked like Sanders was going to take it, or Elizabeth Warren was going to take it, or one of the other ones. And even here, everything that he does to Trump is just to negate. It's not an affirmative case.
So then here's the thing. He's making a tremendous amount of money. As we reported in headlines, he pulled in $350 million in August. That's just, again, massive, dwarfing Barack Obama in 2008. If he's coasting, and if what we hear from our guests, if what we hear pretty much from every corner of Biden supporters is that they're not exactly enthused about the guy, but they're reluctantly throwing their lot in with him because he's not Trump, why do we see such tremendous amounts of money coming in? What's the disparity?
They want to get rid of Trump. They hate Trump. Like, think of the Republicans for the moment. You have like Mitt Romney, you have some of these other Republicans that back, I think even Bolton at this point. Because basically what they get from a foreign policy standpoint is already part of the Democrats. What they get from a financial standpoint.
If it's that, is that enough?
For them it is, yeah. I mean, because keep in mind, if you are wealthy, if you are rich, you don't want the ugly mask of America to get ripped off. You need the shuck and jive. You need people to not see America for what it is. You need them to see it with the mask on, meaning an Obama. An Obama keeps the mask on. A Kamala Harris keeps the mask on. And Joe Biden Mitt Romney keeps the mask on. Donald Trump does not. I mean, look at what Donald Trump has done. Where Obama would say, all right, we're going to put Venezuela on the list of nations that could potentially destroy America. Nobody says anything. Trump goes further. And he gets with Guaido openly, and it's like, yeah, we're going to take that country down. And we're going to do everything in our power to do so. And everybody sees it. It's not even a secret. When Obama was going after Syria, Obama was doing everything in his power to undermine and gut that country to the tune of 500,000 people dead. But what did Obama do? He comes out and he says, no boots on the ground. He lies. The public says, okay. The media says, okay. Meaning the fact that he's involved in regime change is not necessarily overt until Obama gets out of office, Fox News runs it, the pages of the New York Times runs it, and they even run the Libya stuff. But at the time it was going on, he was able to keep the mask on for what exactly he was doing. Trump doesn't do that. Trump is Trump. And so whether it's whether it's Iran, whether it's him admitting to the regime change efforts in Syria, no president would ever do that. Like, no president would ever come up and say the last guy tried to regime change in another country. While he is trying to, he takes the mask off. He's going to give those ugly tax cuts. He's going to do all that stuff. And so you get a lot of these people who say, I could get what we want out of the Democratic Party. I could get the militaristic thing. I could get the financial thing because those guys are going to give us tax cuts. And I don't have to deal with this grotesqueness of what I think the party is. So Mitt Romney thinks he's better than Trump, despite the fact that economically Mitt Romney would have done the exact same things Trump did, even perhaps militarily. It's optics. That's what I'm saying. This is not just a Democratic optic thing. This is a political system optics issue that Trump goes beyond what they would typically be okay with in regards to how grotesque some of the policies of this country are. I think that's what it is. I mean, otherwise, I don't know what it is. 70%, the majority of Republicans are back in Trump. They have no issue with him. The wealth of the party.
I guess why it seems like at the same, like, isn't this an existence proof of doesn't this prove that the Democratic Party is incredibly weak? In other words, if you're saying that it's optics, but that it's not going to work. Okay, so then if they're incredibly weak, then why the hell aren't you guys actually taking them over?
Because lefties.
Why aren't you? I don't mean to.
That's the catch. Because
why
lefties
taking the Democratic Party over.
Because lefties for the last 40, 50 years have gotten into their heads you have nowhere else to go, and that it is better to pick a Joe Biden even if you can't stand him, as opposed to a Republican. And that's become dogma that has become drilled into people's heads. I mean, this is the teachings, right? The moment that Joe Biden wins, you have all of these people, even places like TYT, who burned their reputation backing Hillary Clinton, despite the fact that Hillary Clinton lost. Meaning, if you would have stood up and said, yeah, no, this is a fail for us, and Clinton loses, well, that's at the very least giving you some clout and legitimacy of having the capability of pushing back against a party saying, we might not be able to win, but we do have the power to make you lose. You need to respect us. No, they threw all of their credibility into the fire. I'm making a point that lefties for the last 40, 50 years have accepted the argument of you have nowhere else to go, blue no matter who, and even that is pragmatic to choose somebody who in no way represents your interests because a Republican is horrible. They never understand that them doing that inverts politics. Like, if I accept that it is my job to get this guy in office as opposed to this job or his job to get my vote, those are drastically different things. The argument is, and the reality of it is their job to get your vote. And by that, taking and accepting and appropriating policies that are popular to do so. If Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer came out tomorrow and said, look, we screwed up. We tried to get these Republicans, and there's only 4% of them. We need you, lefties. And we are going to pick up Medicare for all, and we're going to get rid of college debt. That's going to be the tip of our spear. Now, you're going to have some people in the community that don't like it, fair enough, but you're going to energize a large segment of that base, and you're going to get that party swelled with support. They're not going to do that because they don't believe they have to do that, because the last 40 years, they never had to do that. Lefties will fall in line. You have nowhere else to go. It is a pragmatic choice, despite the fact that the political momentum has been moving far to the right. They have accepted all of this cash and has moved to the right and has given lefties an argument that accountability does not belong in this process because it is better to get a Democrat that's a ham sandwich elected as opposed to a Republican. And lefties, blacks, Hispanics say, you're right. And they bow their heads. And they never once realize that if they actually appropriated, fought for the policies, if they actually took their cosmic and philosophical responsibility, that no, these other things are more popular than just getting a Democrat elected. And we're going to fight under the guise of policy. So yeah, I'm standing here for Medicare for all. I'm standing here for this or for that. Pick three. And say, it is not a responsibility to get anybody in this party elected. It is the responsibility of this party to appropriate policy that would ameliorate the country. For God's sake, it is not a beauty pageant. You're being put in that office to do very specific things to ameliorate the hard edges of the society. It's somewhere along the way that has been forgotten. No. You're right, Shane. Every lefty, every African-American, every person that believes in some level of policy and not just the political nonsense at all should step out and say, I'm done. Just like if somebody was working at a company that feel that they were being taken advantage of, they say, I'm done. If it crashes, that's on you. I am standing up for policy to represent the interests of not just my own, but the country itself. And you will get my vote, and you will get the people of this country's vote when you represent our interests. And if you can do that to the tunes of tens of thousands, of tens of millions, you will get those policies, or you will get proof positive that you are not living in a representative government. Because how could you be if the party that is supposed to represent your interests and the interests of America basically says these policies that the American public overwhelmingly chooses, not just members of your party, we don't care. And we would rather tank it to a man who we're calling the apocalypse as opposed to appropriate those policies that will organically bring people together to win. One or the other. I would say you need to find out. And I would say that should be the position that people take. Shane, you're 1,000% right. It's not the party is strong. It's like a horse that has been broken, that you have it with a little string and the horse stays there, not realizing that at any point it can break away and run. It's a mental thing. It's a conceptual thing built by 40 years of propaganda. That's why they don't do anything different. You guys are listening to Fault Lines. I'm sorry. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Shooting from the lip.
We're taking no prisoners here. Real opinions for real people. Where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to catch them out, we actually let them expand on their views. What's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
No, Nico.
Fault lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're taking calls, 202-521-1320, 202-521-1320. We're having a bit of trouble bringing the current guest on. We're getting him on now. In any event, we are taking calls, 202-521-1320, if you feel like calling in. Talking about democratic misfeasance, malfeasance, nonfeasance, however you want to put this.
Well,
I guess a lack of representation is the feeling. Yeah. I don't know. There are other questions here, though. I mean, one way of looking at this is maybe American society is just, whether it's disengaged or politically the winds have shifted, or people who are very far to the left within the American political system don't understand. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong about this stuff. The American people might not be as far left as you think they are, is the thing.
Oh, I don't think they are.
Or whatever.
No, I don't think they are.
It just might be true.
But I have no expectation of that. Like, if I say, it's in the interest of a society to ensure that they take vital services, meaning electricity, railways, those things need to be under public control. The public may say, yeah, we disagree with that. And they may consider that too far to the left based on their own, rearing of the world, per se. So fair enough. But if I say, hey, let's increase Social Security, overwhelming majority of the public agrees with that. Like, that's what I'm saying about the left-right stuff. That it matters less. What do you want from the standpoint of policy? That matters more. And that's what I would say would be the political center. What media does is slimy and underhanded. Because what media would say is, Joe Biden is a centrist. Is he? How's the guy a centrist if, like, out of 300 million people, the majority don't take that point of view? What they're talking about is they're a centrist from the standpoint of wealth. Meaning, if you're looking at the political spectrum, you're thinking to yourself, all right, where things are. They're not including the public in that conversation. What they're including is Biden. They're including Congress. And so you get like an AOC, and then you get like a Joe Biden. And you might get a Manchin, and they would say Biden is a centrist. But is he? Like, we're talking about, at this point, just oligarchs. Talking about, what their political ideologies are. I'm talking about what the public of the country, what the country wants. And if you go down the list and just ask it, not associated with party, that stuff tends to be towards the left. And so when I say that Joe Biden is not a centrist or he's not representing this stuff, I am literally talking about both parties not caring about the interests of the public. And that's profound. And that's something that the country, honestly, seems to not come to grips with and grapple with. And the left just keeps going with the charade. They'll complain. Blacks will complain, but they'll keep going with the charade. Oh, they're taking us for granted. Yes, because you incentivize your irrelevance by backing them. I mean, I really do think the horse analogy works. That you have a powerful horse, you've beaten that horse, and that horse stands there thinking that there's a strong, mighty chain holding it together, and there's nothing. And so he just stands there, broken, thinking that he has nothing else and nowhere else to go.
But that sounds so abysmal, man. I mean, if you're speaking
true.
as I don't want to. Here's the thing: I don't want to use labels because I could say speaking. My tendency at first was to be like speaking as a lefty, but I don't even know what that means. These are just labels that we're using.
Yeah, these are labels, right?
Like as a sort of self-description or as a self-identifying description or metaphor or parallel, that just sounds so demoralizing.
But it's true. Think about it. Think about it for yourself, Shane.
Abused, thoughtless. Scared animal.
Think about it for yourself.
I just
think about it for yourself.
More from anybody. I want more, whether they're my friends, my enemies. I just want people to flourish. To become the best or the worst that they can be, the most human they can be. And that sounds so.
But that's your point of view.
From
the standpoint of a political actor that wants to get in office, you just want to get in office. You don't care. I'm being honest with you. I'm just saying it's like anything else.
From your perspective, there's got to be some shift. What's the other better way to see yourself, or like where does?
I don't see myself at all because I don't see myself as a Democrat. I guess what I'm saying is this: if you think for yourself, think through it for yourself and tell me if I'm wrong. You have, let's say, 20, 30, 40 million people that were backing Sanders. And even beyond backing Sanders, if you take him out of it, if you say, what are the policies you like? From the standpoint of the Democratic Party, you would have a lot of people who are on the left who would max out at all of those policies I mentioned. Increase minimum wage, Social Security, increase expansion, Medicare for all, elimination of student debt, all this stuff. They would say, yes, we agree to that. Not just lefties, but the majority of Democrats. But then Biden gets elected. And those lefties, instead of them 40 million people saying, yeah, I'm done, and balk. And what happens if they do that? What happens if Sanders comes out and says, look, you will get our support when you support Medicare for all and this other policy. I understand we didn't win, so we can't get everything, but you would get our support when you represent us. That's a whole different way of doing politics. That is literally putting at risk their ability to even win, let alone the policy discussion. That is a powerful position to take. But that's not what lefties do. And you know for yourself, if lefties did what I just said, you would put at risk the ability for the Democratic Party to win, and that party would either have to shift, meaning appropriate those policies, or lose. But that's not what they did. They immediately bowed their heads, and they say, you got to back Biden. And all of these TV, all these lefty networks, the CEDARs of the world, the TYTs of the world, will come out and say, you got to back Biden. And there will be no fight in that. Biden will give you performative measures like the task force. They'll accept it. Biden would even trot out Republicans on the Democratic National Convention stage that would take slaps at lefties. Lefties, after being called racist, sexist, after pretended as if they didn't even exist from the standpoint of color in the party, after being called uniquely evil by Elizabeth Warren, will now turn around and say, all right, we got to back Joe Biden. As if they have no responsibility, meaning the candidate has zero responsibility to represent the interests not just of their party, but also the public itself. And they would say, you gotta back Biden. You don't have a choice. Trump is a monster. Trump is a maniac. Trump is going to end the world. You gotta back Biden. And they would say that all the way up to the election. Now, you tell me, if the other position exists, meaning that other strategy, that other plan exists, but they, for whatever reason, can't see it, can't conceptualize it, and will never do it, and the Democratic Party can accept that that horse will stay there broken, then how am I wrong? My analysis is spot on. They're the politically equivalent of an abused spouse or a broken horse. Take your pick. But they will stand there and they will vote Democrat. And then they will get mad at people for other parties who don't. It's astonishing. They'll be like, hey, if all the Green Party voters, who is a completely different party, voted for this Democrat. Or, hey, if those Republican voters, they're Republicans. What are you talking about? It's true. That analogy bites, but it's true.
All I can want, and again, this is somebody who's not exactly on the left, but has some sympathies with some left policies. All I want is for you guys or for whomever to do well. That just sounds, that doesn't sound just like abusive or like a case where you've been abused, but also like a case where you're weirdly shutting yourself down. And I don't know, maybe you can see this in the fact that even you were supporting Bernie, but he's like entering the gerontocracy. He's kind of moribund. The 2020 was probably his last election. Yeah. Certainly his last viable one, at least in my estimation. So just as a movement, I don't know. There's with AOC, with the squad, quote unquote. There are signs of something new and fresh. Anyway, we've got to go to a guest. We've got Chris Smalls joining us. Let's go to him. We're joined by Chris Smalls, activist and organizer. He's best known for staging a walkout at an Amazon regional fulfillment center in Staten Island, New York. That followed the company's failure to protect him and his fellow workers after learning that an employee there had tested positive for COVID-19. Chris, thank you for joining us this morning.
Hey.
How are you doing?
I'm well. Thank you for having me. Good morning, everybody.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us. First time we've had you on. You came on the older incarnation of Fault Lines, I believe, once, but great to have you. For those listening, real quick, you can check Chris out on Twitter, where I'd recommend you go. Just go to _down Amazon. I'll repeat that. It's at shut, the word shut, the character underscore, and then the words down Amazon. So shut down Amazon with an underscore between shut and down. Anyway, that's where you can find Chris online if you go over to Twitter. Chris, thank you again for joining us. We had you. We've had pretty much every guest we've had today, or we're going to be having today, spoke at this People's Party convention. Nick Brana, the organizer. Anyway, how is that for you? How have you been, and how was that for you? How have things been going?
Oh man, that was a breath of fresh air to be a part of the People's Party convention. I heard, the conversation about, the Democrats and, the Republicans in this election and who we are, I guess you could say, deemed to vote for this election. I think we're all in agreement that, we want to get the Trump administration out of office. And, unfortunately, but fortunately, we have a candidate that we're just going to have to, I guess you could say, hold accountable. Biden and Harris.
How do you do that, Chris?
How do we do that?
Yes.
Well, this People's Party convention was one way for sure. We were able to pick up a lot of momentum. I think we're over 500,000 views, which means people are really on board with actually forming a people's party, a third party. And that's a good thing. I heard you talking about the Bernie supporters. A lot of the Bernie supporters, they support me as well. A lot of them I spoke to personally. A lot of them continue to actually help me try to organize. They support everything I do, every action I do, every demonstration. So it's just like just staying the course right now. We all agree that I don't think that Biden's going to be an 8-year candidate. I think we want something new. We want something more progressive, and we want something more that represents the socialist class. And we know that Biden knows that he doesn't represent that. He said it yesterday when he gave his speech. He's not a radicalist. He's not a socialist.
Chris, I guess I'm trying to get to something a little bit more, something a little bit more core. Because I was at the People's Convention with you, and I agree. Having a lot of people step out and saying, we disagree with this or we don't particularly like this. And the third party thing tries to add threat to it, meaning we can walk. But if they don't believe you'll walk, and they believe that regardless of all of this other hysteria, that the overwhelming majority of lefties are going to vote, regardless of what they do, for Biden. And not just the overwhelming majority of lefties, African Americans, Hispanics, basically people who are terrified of the Republican will vote Joe Biden and will do so to the tune of 77%, regardless of what Joe Biden can come out tomorrow and say, you know what, I'm going to cut Social Security. And that 77% will still say, okay, Joe Biden could pee in everybody's cereal at the factory, on television. Everybody can see him do it. And you would still have all of these Democrats and lefties say, this is the burden we must bear. And they would go and vote Joe Biden. Right. I'm saying, how is there leverage at any chance in that situation when all of you guys are basically over a barrel and accept the fact that you're over a barrel without any agency or leverage to push the candidate?
Right. And you know what? And obviously the influence of Bernie Sanders is probably the reason why, we're going to have that 77%. Bernie Sanders dropped out of the race. He endorsed Biden now. All his, his squad that he mentored, they are riding with Biden now. So ultimately, there's your constituents that's going to ride with Biden. Just because Bernie Sanders is like, you know what, we have to do this. So when you have this foundation that is pretty much, stuck in, limbo right now, that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to have to vote for Biden short term. But I believe that even though we're voting for Biden short term, I think in our minds, in the back of our minds, we still want to start this foundation for the third party. And I think that's what the People's Party convention was all about. Like, okay, look, we all can agree to get the Trump administration out. It may not be what we want, but we know right now, they know as well that the third party is very much a viable thing. Like you was mentioning, that the millions of voters that can opt out and not vote for Biden. I believe that those millions of voters also going to be the ones that's going to be swayed to come to the third party. Once we continue our momentum, continue to put together things where you see this third party emerging within the next 2 years, I believe that by 2024 that it's going to be a very possible thing where we'll be able to have a candidate that'll represent us. And I'm just happy to be a part of that because I believe that's the way of the future. We all know that we want something that's free of corporate money. Amazon is one big influential of this country and the one percenters. So we're tired of it. And I'm definitely for sure tired of it. And I know I can give you one example right now. Kamala Harris.
Wait, Chris, let's do this. Let's bring this back into the other break because we have to take a break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. This is Chris Moss, union rep, and the man who staged an Amazon walkout. Utterly astonishing. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault lines.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the Plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not-so-distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history. This week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm here with my co-host, Shane Stranahan. We're joined by Chris Smalls. Chris Smalls is an activist and organizer, best known for staging a walkout at the Amazon Regional Fulfillment Center in Staten Island, New York, following the company's failure to protect him and his fellow workers after hearing the employee had tested positive for COVID-19. Chris, you have no idea how much I appreciate that, because that takes a certain degree of strength, and that takes a certain degree of willingness. And that's, by the way, not something that you do without risk. Like, what were you risking when you did that walkout? And we know the consequences of it. Could you tell us some of the consequences that took place when you walked out with Amazon? We're going to get to the People's Convention for the moment, but I do want to go and have the audience have an idea of what took place.
Yeah, so the week of March 24th, I took a stance against the company when I attended a manager's meeting and they told me not to tell my employees that somebody tested positive. That was the last time that I worked for Amazon.
That was the last straw.
Yeah, that was it. That entire week, after working with the company since 2015, being a manager, assistant manager for 4 years, that's just not something that I couldn't stand with. I took a stance right there. I spent that entire week organizing off the clock in the break room, the cafeteria, telling my fellow workers that, you're possibly putting yourself at risk. After not receiving a viable answer at the end of the week, they put me on a quarantine to silence me. And I didn't fall for that tactic, so I decided to hold the walkout on March 30th. That resulted into my termination 2 hours later. On March 30th, my whole life changed. Obviously, the risk I took was my career, which it cost me. It cost me my livelihood. I have no health insurance right now. I'm still unemployed. But I still didn't give up. I embraced the position, the platform that was given to me. I used it to uplift voices of other workers and organize and form my own nonprofit organization now, TCOEW, the Congress of Essential Workers. And together we've been traveling the country, protesting, advocating with Black Lives Matter, with unions, with prominent people, and we continue to fight. We just spent this past weekend in Washington, D.C. in front of Jeff Bezos' $23 million mansion. The weekend before, we was in New York City at his $80 million mansion, and now we're gearing up to head to L.A. to his $165 million mansion.
So this is the way that you've decided, okay, we're going to push back. Because ultimately, while you were in the organization, you didn't have the power to push back in this way. You found a new way of fighting.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Throughout the midst of this pandemic, forming this family, forming this alliance and this coalition. I feel like this is the way we can fight back and get our voices heard and get our demands met.
Let me ask you something else within this vein of thought. In the same way that you had to pull yourself out of the institution in order to actually fight that institution in a different way, because within it, your leverage is to some degree constrained. Isn't that almost identical way of dealing with political factions? Meaning, if you are in the Democratic Party, your ability to fight that party is limited and constrained because you're always at the end of the day going to vote for the party. But there may be other ways outside of that space that gives you more latitude and more leverage to do so. Is there anything that Joe Biden could do in this electoral campaign or say where you would say, okay, I can't vote for that?
Yeah.
What would it be?
Honestly, I don't like the fact that he's not talking about defunding the police. I feel like that might hurt him. Right now this country is such disarray when it comes to police brutality that's something that we do not want to hear. We need something that's going to put these police in check.
Agreed. But if he comes out, he's out now saying speeches, basically saying the rioting needs to stop. I'm going to give more money to the cops. Is that enough for you to not vote for him? Is that the point where you say, all right, I'm done? Just like when you were at the company in Amazon and you got to the point of saying, I'm done. Is that the point where you were like, okay, I'm done. I can't back this?
Possibly, yes. It's possible. I feel like fighting back when it comes to them is just right now accountability. And for whatever reason you feel strongly about his policies, we say it. This man is not representing what you want to, what type of future that you want to live in. Then don't vote for him. And unfortunately, we don't want to go with that because we know what's at stake if we keep Trump in office. We can already foresee the future. And when it came to, I could say this: when it comes to me pushing back against Amazon, everything I did was strategic. Everything I did was well thought out and pretty much 2 steps ahead, even to the point of organizing now. Everything we do is strategic and well thought out. So when I say to voters, the same thing. If you're not going to vote for Biden, but what is your alternative solution? If you do not have one, then I don't advise you to not just opt out for one thing that he may say. I advise you to vote anyway, but then make sure you think about your alternative solution. Make sure you prepare for your alternative solution. I was getting ready to say, one example is Kamala Harris. She signed a letter to Jeff Bezos on my behalf, along with 9 other senators as well, Bernie Sanders included. And it's been a lot of lip service. These senators came out when my story broke. They jumped on the bandwagon. They all advocated, spoke about it, tweeted about it, spoke to media about it on my behalf, sent the letter on my behalf. But I haven't had one conversation with any of these senators on how we can resolve this issue or how we can get some leverage for workers. They just did this for their constituents to make it seem like they're standing in solidarity with the working class people. Now that sits in the back of my head. And it definitely...
Chris, that's normal. I'm saying
right,
that's entirely normal because in the reality of it is, they just want it to look as if they're doing X or doing Y. But I'm making the point that the level of irrelevance that people on the left, the African Americans, that the poor have in the Democratic Party is entirely powered by that sentiment of, I have nowhere else to go, and I'm going to vote for this performative party that doesn't really care about this stuff. They don't care about that stuff. They don't care about unionization. They don't care about any of that stuff. All of that stuff is optics. Right. And it goes from a momentum that took place going back to the time where the party did care about it. I guess my thing is, in the same way that you were able to extricate yourself from Amazon and entail that risk and go full barrel at that company for what it was doing regarding COVID or for that matter, wages or anything else. So Jeff Bezos, I mean, the people had put a guillotine out in front of his house the other day. I'm saying the same thing is true. That was funny. That was actually pretty funny. But the same thing is true for party politics. It's not so much that I'm saying don't vote because you don't vote. I'm making the point that it's almost like a union, but it's the same recognition of people who are Democrats who are lefties, I call them the battered wives of the political space, need to also extricate themselves out. And the plan is to stand under policy, to basically make the argument that it's kind of like a union that basically says, look, you are not going to prosper if you're going to exploit me. And people need to stand out and say, if the majority of the public is backing these policies, not even just Democrats, the majority of the public, then there's a responsibility here for them not to just give lip service, but to actually represent that interest. And you will not get our vote if you don't represent our interests. And I'm saying that is a play, that is strategy, that is pulling millions of people to your cause and saying American public needs X. And you believe that because the Republican Party is horrible, that you could be less horrible. And we're saying that's not right. That's not something that you're going to get away with. I'm making the argument to you that the play for this is if tens of millions, all of those organizations that you interact with, stepped out and said, we're done. We're done until you back Medicare for all that has 88% support or 70% public support, or expanding Social Security. I mean, standing under policy. I'm not saying just, go out and do nothing. I'm saying in the same way.
Isn't that one of those first mover problems, though, Jamarl?
It is.
Isn't that one of those
1,000%.
problems? Where like everybody would have to act together in order for it to be most effective. And then if you're the only one who's doing it, if you're the only one who's pulling out, if Chris were to pull out and his organization, he didn't get representation, Amazon didn't have this pressure, just looking at it from their perspective, they would be shooting themselves in the foot. So I can see that. And Chris, for your information, this is something Jamarl and I talk about all the time. This is definitely one of Jamarl's core issues. You can definitely.
This is my trigger points.
You can definitely. This
is one of my trigger points.
I wanted to, Chris, in our last minute or two, I just wanted to ask you. I want to get back to Amazon for just a second. I saw you reposting this. Is it true that Amazon had briefly posted a listing? It seems like they've taken it down, but they briefly posted a job listing looking for like an intelligence analyst to do sort of anti-union organizing work and anti-union research work. And doesn't this strike you as, it makes me think of you. I mean, not just because I saw you reposting, but because you're the most prominent like organizer pushing back against Amazon that I've seen. What's your take on this? Am I right about that? What was your thought?
Yeah, I believe that was directly aimed towards us in a sense because of our actions in D.C. with the guillotine. They're trying to figure out how to disconnect workers from organizing, disconnect workers from communicating with organizations like me. And they're definitely monitoring everything I do, for sure, 100%. So it just validates the fact that this company has been anti-union the whole entire time. It validates the fact that, people just now notice that position being up there, but that position actually been up there since probably last year. So that's
very interesting.
Right. So we know that this company is actually spying on its workers and actually infiltrating their social media, watching their every move. And they're doing these things because I already know that they're watching my social media. They see my Twitter page. They even included it in some litigation that I found in a case that out in California when another worker is suing a company. They included, I don't know if it was by mistake or on purpose, but they included some litigation where they had literally my own tweet. So, like, they're watching us. They're watching the workers. They're watching workers that used to work for the company, that don't work for the company. And I'm glad that they actually made that mistake yesterday because now it shows that this company will go to the extreme measure to pay somebody. This position is paying over six figures. We're talking about a level 7 and level 8 in Amazon. To my
exactly,
knowledge,
just to do opposition research, basically against you or people acting in your capacity, trying to do this kind of work. Chris, I'm sorry to cut you off, but we've got to go out. We'd love to have you back on soon. It'd be great to talk more about this, about Amazon, about the work you're doing. Chris Smalls, activist and organizer, best known for staging a walkout at an Amazon regional fulfillment center in New York. We'll be back in a minute with another 2 hours of Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Thank you for listening.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, welcome to your daily inoculation for propaganda. In the left corner, I am the indefatigable, ever vigilant, the last antibody to a sick and seizing political system, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And on the West Coast and in the politically independent corner, I am your investigative radio talk show host and political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
You are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. So let's get in the news. Let's start here. Ed Markey beats upstart Joe Kennedy in the Massachusetts Democratic primary 55.5 to 44.5. That is the first election where a Kennedy has lost in Massachusetts. Ed Markey had to invoke AOC and some of his other lefty contenders. And for Joe Kennedy's point, he was able to get the endorsement of one Nancy Pelosi. Well, that didn't work. And even though Joe Kennedy started off with a bang in the lead, Ed Markey comes out on top by 10. Good job, Ed. Ed is a proponent of the Green New Deal, expansion of Social Security. He's a lefty. He's a lefty. And Joe Kennedy, who was a representative, tried to take him down and lost. Shout out to Ed Markey. The Trump administration has said that the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention plans to temporarily halt the evictions of consumers earning $99,000 a year or less to prevent the virus from spreading, a senior administration official said Tuesday. Fauci on Labor Day. You know, the interesting part of that particular idea is that the Centers of Disease Control's plan or a temporary halt evictions of consumers earning $99,000 is that it took this to do that. And that's sad in and of itself. Senator Ed Markey, right, we did that one. In Los Angeles, police shot 29-year-old black cyclist Dijon Kizzee more than 20 times in the back on Monday afternoon after two sheriff's deputies tried to stop him for a bicycle code violation, says Benjamin Crump, who is representing Kizzee's family. The LA Sheriff's Department said Kizzee was shot less than 20 times after dropping a handgun he had been seen carrying and punching one of the deputies. In Kenosha, protests against police shooting of Jacob Blake continued during Trump's visit to the city. While there, Trump did not meet with the family of Jacob Blake. Instead, Blake's cousin called for new president. Trump goes to compound, does not meet with family. Interestingly enough, to add to the story, the family of Jacob Blake's had a block party. And that block party had dancing, singing, food, and everything else. And basically, it was somewhat of a repudiation of I would say, the violence, but beyond repudiation of violence, also a pushback on the president himself. Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden is reportedly set to announce that it raked in $350 million in August, breaking the former President Barack Obama's record for campaign fundraising of $193 million from September 2008. Basically, we are bribing and applauding people for being bribed. Yesterday marked the first day that Joe Rogan's podcast is out on Spotify. The result of Spotify's reported deal of over $100 million to buy the rights to Joe Rogan's show for distribution. The only catch is that there were show archives that were posted live to the channel. Some of the most controversial episodes were left out, contradicting the public statements of Rogan about the nature of the deal. Guests left out include Michael Shermer, Alex Jones, and David Seaman. Far-right figures such as Owen Benjamin, Stefan Montague, and Milo Yiannopoulos, Gavin McInnes, Charles Johnson, and Sargon of Akkad, as well as comedian Chris D'Elia and former guest on the show, Michaela Peterson, were left out. Poll workers in Belarus said that they were asked to falsify vote totals on August 9th, signing documents with falsified results and signing summary documents with key portions left blank so as to disguise the fraud. Protesters in Beirut tried to storm Lebanon's parliament the same day the country celebrated the passage of 100 years since the declaration of Greater Lebanon by French mandate authorities. The protests coincide with the visit of Emmanuel Macron of the country weeks after a massive suspicious explosion gutted the capital's port, killed hundreds, injured thousands, and knocked the government out of power. And last, Airline pilots landing at LAX had to close interactions with a guy in a jetpack who was reportedly seen about 300 yards off their wing on a descent into the airport. Flying at jet speeds at about 3,000 feet, the identity of the person is unknown. Don't try this at home, or for that matter, certainly do not try it at the airport. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. So, Shane, the first one I want to go to is Joe Kennedy. The Joe Kennedy race is fascinating to me. I want to play a clip. This was the debate between Joe Kennedy and Ed Markey. This is an awesome clip. Let's play it.
Kennedy, let's turn to a question for you here. A lot of this has been about who can be a better senator for Massachusetts. The University of Virginia has ranked all members of Congress for their effectiveness. And during the 115th Congress, you had a lower score than Mr. Markey and the second lowest score in the Massachusetts congressional delegation. If they think you're not being effective in your current job, why should you get a promotion?
I love that clip. Love that clip. If you're not being effective in your current job, why should you get a promotion and go to Senate? Not just that, Ed Markey had been there for God knows how long. He has been doing God's work. He has a clear ideology of the world, whether you agree with him or disagree with him. And he's straightforward and earnest. He puts you in the mind of a Sanders to some degree. And so when Kennedy tries to take him out, an eyebrow gets raised, especially by lefties. And this goes to my point about lefties being taken advantage of. You believe you have leverage in the party. I believe you do not. I believe that that party can do anything to you and still expect your vote, which incentivizes them treating you as irrelevant as you are. So what happens? The DCCC and the DSCC says, we're going to blacklist anybody that tries to challenge an incumbent, especially if they're lefty. Now, the reason they did this is because AOC says we got to primary some folks. Why? AOC gets in office on the idea of a Green New Deal, expansion of Social Security, Medicare for all, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Agree with her, disagree with her. That's why she got in office. She's representing the interests of her constituents. In order for her to do that, we got to primary some folks. The dinosaurs in the party said, oh my God, and no, we need to stop that. So what it did, it can't stop people from being primaried. What it can do is try to put pressure on companies and whatnot to stop helping them do it. So the DSCC, Democratic Senate Committee, and the DCCC, that's the Democratic Committee, thinking of one is Senate, one for House of Representatives, came up with the same policy. Sherry Bustos, we are not going to allow this. We're blacklisting any company. Now, the catch becomes, did Joe Kennedy and the companies working with Joe Kennedy get blacklisted? I suspect not. Nancy Pelosi, who was a backer of that policy, looks at Joe Kennedy and gives him her blessing, despite the fact that she was against this primary nonsense prior. They don't even need to follow their own rule set because at the end of the day, they know that it's not going to matter. Trump is a maniac, and they're going to point to him, and they're going to stand there. And even people who are backing the People's Party, Cornel West, backer of the People's Party, is still going to vote for Joe Biden, which gets across how powerful that particular effect is and the way to which they can compel behavior of lefties. When I make that argument of a broken horse, Cornel West describes himself as a radical, and God knows he is. I love him to death. But for even Cornel West to go and say, yes, I will be voting for Joe Biden at this point, gets across my analogy. A horse that has been broken, that believes it has nowhere else to go and this is all it can do. And so it stands there. No chain on it, no leash on it, rain, snow, slapped, kicked, doesn't matter. It will stand there, broken. That is the left in the Democratic Party. That is why I call it the equivalent, or the political equivalent of the abused spouse. Because it does have potential. It can, right now, say, no, we bought. But they won't. And that's my point. Shane, that clip of Kennedy trying to take him down is emblematic of what I mean by this. They are willing to ignore their own rules if it means getting a lefty out of office. And they would have done so, and they would have all applauded, and nobody else would have cared about the rule set that they put in place. Ed Markey was fighting for his life in this race, and the establishment wanted him out. He just so happened was able to fight it off. So good job on Ed Markey. I just wanted to give him a shout out because they wanted him. They came for him, and he stands there with the head of Kennedy dripping blood. A win.
Yeah.
Victorious.
So, no. A couple of quick points here. On Kennedys in general, the point that a lot of people are making is that this is the end of the Kennedy political dynasty.
Camelot.
I mean,
yeah. You think so?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I tend to agree. I kind of wonder, moreover, though, if it's the end of political dynasties as such, and then of course the answer is no. And then the question that comes to mind is why? Like why do we still have political dynasties?
Yeah.
These seem like the legacy of some weird monarchical system. Maybe they're emergent from human nature in some sense. Maybe we just create political dynasties because we have families and families accrue power and stuff on that basic level. But on the other hand, you probably shouldn't. You live in a democracy that's that's creating an oligarchy that would exist for generations, literally, pretty much by definition.
But I think people get used to the name.
I think it's always helpful to call into question the idea of a political dynasty as such, even if you can. There are arguments to be made for it, but there are a lot of arguments to be made against it. And it's just weird looking back at recent history how many of our presidents have been a part of different types of explicitly political dynasties, whether it's the Kennedys, the Clintons, the Bushes, etc.
Romneys.
That's exactly the Romneys, totally.
Yeah.
So that's thing number one. Thing number two, I don't actually know that we've talked about this. We might have brought it up once or twice, but I think fundamental to this issue, and when we were talking with Chris about it, you were going back and forth with him. If the idea here is, okay, we're going to hold our nose, we're going to vote Biden right now, the justification for that would be Trump is a monster. That if Trump is the worst thing in the world, like, in other words, there's if you think about it in terms of an equation, as Trump's threat gets worse, you need less of a justification to choose to support the alternative.
Yes.
If you hold Biden steady and Trump is worse and worse and worse and worse, you're just going to switch to Biden at some point, even if you might have an incentive to boycott it, like you're saying. Even if that might be a rational decision in another context, it would switch with this one. But then the question becomes, is Trump that person? Now, I know a lot of people on the right are going to have their own answer to that question, but it's interesting to see the left coming up with their answer to that question too, because I don't know. I'll put it like this. It's weird to see people who are further to the left than the Democrats being more willing to accept Trump than the Democratic establishment. What do you think's responsible for that? I told
you. I kept saying that, right? I kept saying that they're willing to, when in the primaries, when you had that situation where Sanders, they thought he was going to run away with it. And they said, Chuck Todd, great question, if Sanders takes it, meaning he has the number of delegates, but he doesn't have enough to clinch it, will you back him or will you fight it out at the convention? Every last person raised their hands on stage, said, we'll fight it out at the convention, meaning we'll rip it from his hands at the convention. He is unacceptable. Now, all of them knows that if they did that, none of those lefties would vote for the next candidate, meaning they would lose that race. They did it knowingly. Now, the reason why I say that is Nancy Pelosi with $100 million in the bank, or Chuck Schumer with, Wall Street Chuck, or any of these guys are basically oligarchs, or these guys are rich, paid by oligarchs.
So wait, I got it.
I guess I'm saying they don't care. They don't care. It doesn't affect them in the same way it affects somebody else.
It came to me in a beam of light. No, that makes perfect sense. It's like an epiphany sent down like manna from heaven or something like that. It's just this idea that the Democratic Party is far more afraid and far more at odds with its own sort of radical grassroots.
Well, think of FDR.
Any member of the opposition.
Yes,
because
think of FDR.
The real existential threat comes from transformation from within. It comes from exactly what we're talking about. So there's this weird thing where like they're afraid, they're weak, they're afraid, and they're doing everything they can to keep it at bay. But at the same time, I'm just going to be bluntly honest here. It seems like the self-definition that you were sharing earlier of like an abused spouse, or an abused horse, like, various sort of degraded, sad, and like ideally something that somebody would come in to save at some point, but something that has no power to save itself. That's a self-defeating, and it's a self-defeating image, and I can see other people adhering to that too. So on the one hand, you have the party that seems deathly afraid in some sense of that transformation, but then the people who would be doing the transformation, they could have a much better self-image and a much better agenda. At least in terms of the how, not the what necessarily.
Well, I'm not a Democrat. I
don't know. We've got to go into a break.
Yes, let's go to a break. But I'm not a Democrat, so I don't consider it a self-image in that case. I'm trying to describe progressive Democrats that remain in the Democratic Party but are on the left, and whatever that breed is.
Fair enough.
So that's kind of where I'm going with it. But you're right. We have to take a break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment. I suppose we're going to get back into this conversation because I want to respond to that. Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in DC. If you guys are in the area, you can catch us on the radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We are also kicking around in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. Also, if you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and give us a share. If you want to join in on the conversation, which you can do for the next 15 minutes, and then 15 minutes in the 9 o'clock hour, you can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach out by phone at 202-521-1320. Your engagement makes the show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. And just because we may have an adverse opinion than yours, still feel free to call in. I do want to respond to something. Would you say a bolt from heaven or manna from heaven? Yeah. The catch is the Democratic Party has two constituencies that make it up. A class that is wealthy, an owner class, and a class that's not. If the owner class tanks it to Trump, so what? He's still going to be an owner. He's still going to get his taxes back. He's going to get a ton of money for his business and everything else. From the standpoint of the base, however, tanking it hurts because you're talking about people who rely on Social Security, who rely on Medicare, who rely on various services, and who want their government to perform those services that are in the interest of the community itself. So when they're looking at the world and you have one side that's wealthy and says, all right, we can lose to Trump. What we can't accept is Sanders changing the party for a generation. Go back and listen to Chris Matthews when Chris Matthews was like, hey, maybe it's better that Trump takes it. Why? Because he understood that Sanders, if he took it, would have fundamentally changed the party for a generation, just like third-way Democrats did to the FDR type of Democrats that were in before. Meaning, the New Deal Democrats were chased out by third-way Democrats during the Reagan era. They are fully understand and aware of that and think of that stuff as almost a brain center. Go back and look at the conversations that Pelosi and all of these other Democrats were having with Pete Buttigieg and whatnot. How do we stop Sanders? They thought of it as an organized unit, meaning their brain trust, their thought process, 0.1% basically of America, basically making decisions for the entirety of the party. And if the party doesn't like something or disagree with something, etc., they will be against it, despite the fact that you may have a majority support within the party. And so when we get to elections and you have Pelosi and you have somebody like me, well, Pelosi is not harmed by Trump. She's annoyed by Trump if he wins. My family members or whatnot are on the chopping block. So whether you're black, whether you're Hispanic, whether you're poor, all of these people get into the situation of, well, you got to vote for Joe Biden. Because they don't believe they have a choice because of what they see as a consequence that the Democratic Party knows is a consequence of them taking that action. That's why I make this point of saying, no, that mechanism needs to be broken. And that mechanism, as you said, Shane, gets worse. Meaning, is Trump really the boogeyman that they say he is? And the problem is that the argument also goes both ways. If I am saying, you represent my interests when you get my vote, or you get my vote. And if millions, tens of millions of people say, we want this, are you really going to lose it to a man that is the apocalypse as you're saying it? I mean, this is your description of Donald Trump. Are you really willing to lose it to him? Like, I'm saying it flips the argument over its head. And for odd reasons, lefties accept one way of that framing, which is, well, you got to vote for Joe Biden because the other guy's a monster. As opposed to, is the party really not going to appropriate Medicare for all in order to organically bring it together to beat a man who they're calling a monster? Both of those arguments cut basically in the exact same way, just in different sides of the coin. I'm saying lefties have accepted the other side of that is against their own self-interest and makes them irrelevant. The party knows it, and the party uses it to their advantage to tame lefties. I mean, that's just true. I mean, like, if you're looking at it from the standpoint of left, like, it's an analysis from the left, as have been in the Democratic Party for all these years, and then after, I think, 2016, voted against the candidate. I think I voted for Stein, and at that point, I haven't voted for Democrat since. This is my analysis just from looking at it from those years, and from looking at family members, looking at friends of mine, and seeing how they function, and that's how they function. It's sad. We have callers. Do you want to respond to that, by the way, before we get to the callers?
Let's just get straight to the callers. We could have this conversation all day, and frankly, we've been going back and forth on this exact issue. Let's go to callers. We've got Tarif calling in from New Orleans. Tarif, you're on the line. What's going on?
Good morning, gentlemen. Good morning. I have two comments, but before I get to the two comments, I had the attendance day at Markey debate 6 years ago when I basically got ran off my job for, standing up for myself, and they found out I knew about the contaminated water. And sometimes I think when I was in there, like that guy said about Neuralinks, sometimes I feel like something happened to me while I was in there, me against my will. But sometimes I be thinking, I say, I hope not. I know I went far to the left on that one. Trying to create a joke, but the joke didn't come up correctly. But anyway,
oh, you're good.
But anyway, that's why we need to make sure we have laws for Neuralinks against Neuralinks, chipping people against their will. But anyway, my two comments: USA must drop charges against Julian Assange, Amnesty.org. I could put the link up to a petition to y'all tweet for today, and the tweet is for people to sign, so he won't be extradited to the United States and he can get become free. And the second one is dealing with Mexico on the brink of civil war and the cheapest reason of Mexico, where Duran had wrote yesterday that indigenous tribes is being forced off the land by paramilitary. It's pretty serious down there, man. So, man, we gotta pray for those people and make sure that won't happen, But anyway, like I said, we do need laws for Neuralink because, we don't want people walking around here chip against their will, and that's all I want to say.
Thanks for the call, Tarif. Yeah, we've been talking about the Neuralink. I'm also pretty cautious about that. Jamarl and I are going back and forth. On Mexico, I was just looking at the article you sent. That's from the Duran. We're actually having Alexander Mercouris on tomorrow, I believe. I'm not sure that we're going to talk about this with him. We might. So I just need to make sure that he's
that may be a big deal.
With it. But
keep in mind.
No, it sounds like it is.
Oberon.
He also has. This was written by somebody else, so we could get whoever wrote this article. I think it's Lucas Leroz. Potentially, we could talk to him about getting them on them. But that might be more. We could do a full segment with them on that. Anyway, what were you saying?
Almo. What is it? Oberon. I think I'm calling it right. Oberon. The president of Mexico. He's a lefty, right? And so he gets in office. It's open season from the standpoint of the United States going to crushing lefty governments in regards to South America. And you have him on the border of the United States. And so the question becomes, you look at what happened to Evo, you look at Honduras, you look at these countries where we basically either were involved in it or there is a whiff of us being involved in it. And it tends to happen to left governments, going all the way back to, the Monroe Doctrine. But Almo needs to be careful in that situation because it's the right-wing elements of those countries have to some degree been given open season with the U.S. that will basically give it fair game if it takes place. That's the only reason that Morales was ripped out of office. And you can make a case that when Hillary Clinton was talking about the guy being taken out by his pajamas by the military was not a coup, it's like it gets ludicrous to some degree of our interest in this stuff. And so, yeah, I mean, I do want to ask him about it, at least one question on it. If it's
we should talk about it. We have an overflowing handful of callers.
Right now. Let's get to the callers.
You might not have seen it. We've had a few more come in the last minute. We've got Brave calling in from Atlanta. Brave, you're on. What's going on?
Hey guys, listening to the guy from Amazon this morning, Chris. He's an awesome guy, and I enjoyed his portion of the convention. I would agree with Jamarl that it seems like it is a matter of a battered wife syndrome, right? Because even as he was speaking, he was saying that he organized, strategized, put everything on the line to leave, and that's acceptable and that's rational. But when it comes to a broader scope of the American people, like Democrats, I guess, or people considering voting Democratic, they don't see the idea of not voting for Biden as strategy, whereas I believe that it is, because the strategy is that you're now teaching the Democratic Party a lesson, and I understand that in order for them to or people to be willing to do that, they would have to not be so afraid of Trump. So I think that the only way that we could possibly even have any success in moving forward, or even defeating the Democratic Party or changing the Democratic Party, we would have to have these organizations like the People's Party and larger organizations come together and target the media. I mean, legally target the corporate media. I know that's a bit kind of around the block, but if you look at it, the reason why they're able to get away with so much stuff, I think, is the large misinformation campaign that goes on in the corporate media. And I don't know how we would actually be able to do that legally, but there has to be some way to do it. And I would wonder if maybe looking back at the Smith-Mundt Act that was changed with the Defense Authorization Act, if maybe there's some reference to it there as far as how we could accomplish it. Because I know that when they changed that, it allows them to bring propaganda more so to target the U.S. Population with propaganda, as I understand it anyways. So are you guys familiar with that?
Yes.
Brave, yes. Yeah, familiar with the Smith-Mundt Act. I haven't heard it referenced in conjunction with this idea. So I'm not sure how it would play out if people tried to use that as a precedent for targeting the Democratic
That's
Party.
interesting, though.
I'm skeptical about.
I'm skeptical, but it's interesting.
Idea, though. I don't mean to shoot it down. I don't know enough about it. You came up with it. I'm going to look into it more. So thank you for the call, Brave. I always like your calls. Going to the next call. We've got D calling in from California. D, you're on. What's going on?
Hey guys, I wanted to make a few points. I didn't get a chance to see the convention. I saw kind of the opening of it. I know I'm looking forward to hearing it, what particular Williamson says. And I know I've been in the same sort of camp as Jamal on sort of strategy from the left, and Sanders, I was completely behind him in the primary, but when someone kind of pushed me to name some other people that I liked, Williamson was the first that came to mind. And I think that people, in terms of like, do you hold the vote or vote Biden this time around? They without a crystal ball, hey, who's to say what is the right thing? So it's just that overall I agree with that. The point that he tries to drive home, that slowly you lurch to the right. The population were basically, by virtue of the media, we slowly lurch to the right as time goes by. And I really would hope that this People's Convention or People's Party takes hold and it provides a alternative. But my fear would also be that it sort of splits the left-leaning voters, because I think you are still going to have, because of the media basically, and the fact that you are still going to have the class. You are still going to have so the people of a certain class.
D from California, thank you for the call. I think that's the classic argument, is that it will split the vote. That's the argument from within the Democratic Party, and of course that's what the people who are doing it want. They want to shut down. If you're boycotting the DNC, it's because you want to break the Democratic Party apart. So there's nothing self-contradictory there. It's just whether or not I think it's justified, looking at the contest with Trump and looking at the wider election. I think that's the real debate. We're going to have to go into a break. We've got two more callers on the line. I think we're going to have time to come back to them. So please hold. I'm going to come back to you in a minute. We're going into an interview with Medea Benjamin, also a speaker at the People's Party Convention. this weekend with Nick Brana. We'll be back in a minute with Medea Benjamin and calls. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Fault lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
Fault lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're taking a few calls here, not taking any more calls because we're speaking with Medea Benjamin in just a second. Before we do that, we have some lingering calls. I want to get to them. We have Bruce calling in from Wisconsin. Bruce, you're on. You've got about 30 seconds. What's on your mind?
Well, you just had a guy from the People's Party, and I got Medea Benjamin from that convention for a party that doesn't exist. Jamarl just admitted he voted for Jill Stein. Why is it you never have anybody from the Green Party who can actually talk about a real party and a real candidate?
I would love to.
We'd love to. Yeah, we've had in the incarnation of the show just before ours with Lee and Garland.
And by the way, at my other show, Political Misfits, we had Howie Hawkins. I mean, I would love to talk to people from the Green Party. So I have no issue with that at all.
That'd be great. No, thank you for the call. Bruce from Wisconsin. We've got Tarek calling in from Georgia. Tarek, you're on. What's going on? About 30 seconds.
I have a question and a comment. I just want to know, what do you guys think about the People's Party being, used as a way to be the only way to basically push the Democratic Party? And I want to know, what do you guys think about Chris Hedges' critique? Because I really think, I don't know if he got credit, but I think Chris Hedges really took the People's Convention away. I think he blew everybody out with his convention. And Levi Sanders, Bernie Sanders' son, actually got mad. I just wanted to know what you guys think about his comments and the People's Party.
I was there at one of the speaking engagements, so I did one of the speeches there. I think it was like a 5-minute one. Chris Hedges is typically amazing in his critique of the Democratic Party. I don't remember exactly what he said in that speech, but I would probably agree. If Sanders' son or got annoyed by that, tough day, dude. People have qualms with not so much what your dad was able to do, per se. I mean, everybody loves that part. It's the secondary part of just collapsing. And so, I don't know what Chris Hedges said, but I would probably agree just from what I've heard Chris Hedges say on this very specific topic. And the push for the People's Party, yes, 1,000% yes. I mean, you need something that's organized, that has a brain center, that can actually push for the interests of workers. And if that means pulling away votes from the Democratic Party to the tune where they believe they can lose, yes, 1,000% yes. It's logical to do so. So let's go to Medea, though. With us, we have co-founder of the human rights group Global Exchange and Peace Group, Code Pink, Medea Benjamin. Welcome to the show, Medea. How's it going today? Medea, can you hear me? Okay, maybe we have some difficulty with the guest.
We sadly cannot hear Medea.
Yeah. We can't hear.
No, I'm trying to. Engineer Andre is working on that.
She's back.
Okay.
No, and the thing is, Medea also spoke at the People's Party convention this week.
Yes, she did.
So we have a pretty much fully packed show. Chris Smalls, we got Medea Benjamin coming on. Yeah.
And you got Jamarl Thomas.
It'll be interesting.
You got Jamarl Thomas. I was there.
And Jamarl Thomas. Now, last and definitely not least, first and foremost, Jamarl Thomas.
I think she said, Medea, can you hear us?
Pardon.
Yes, I am. Thank you. Good
there you are. Okay, so let's try the intro again. Co-founder of the human rights group, Global Exchange and Peace Group, Code Pink, Medea Benjamin. Welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing excellent. I've just caught the last part of what you were talking about, but it's all fascinating, and I'm really glad to be able to be part of the conversation.
Absolutely. Let me ask you a question. So why did you decide to speak at the People's Convention? And let me ask this in two ways. Do you or have you considered yourself, let's say, a Democrat? And regardless of whether that's a yes or no, Why the People's Convention in their pursuit of a new party?
So I consider myself a green, an independent, a progressive Democrat, and somebody searching for a new party. I'm all of those things. And I have been part of this formation since the beginning. I knew Nick when he was a delegate for Bernie, an enthusiastic, brilliant young man, and supported him then and have been supporting him as he started this. I was at their gathering in Washington, D.C. 3 years ago. So I've been following it. I get on the calls when I can. I love to see new formations in beginning, and who knows? We never know which one's going to really make it. So I think we got to support all of these alternatives.
So Medea, I'm just going to get right into it because we've been going back and forth on this, both with callers, with between each other, and with guests this morning. Actually, are you going to hold your nose and vote for Biden? Are you voting for another party? I don't mean that if this is too personal. It is politics after all. I don't mean to get into anything too personal, but I'm just curious. Where are you going? What's your take on this election cycle?
I'm absolutely voting for Biden. I'm very determined that we do everything we can to get Trump out. I'm part of a group that's called Vote Trump Out. And I think that people are very aware, politically engaged people like us, very aware that Biden is not our friend, that this is not going to be a progressive administration, that maybe we get, one or two bones thrown at us. But this is about struggle, and I'd rather struggle under a Biden administration than under Trump. And let me give you a couple of examples. I mostly work on foreign policy issues and have been part of different alliances. In fact, today we're sending out a letter from 100 different organizations calling for a new good neighbor policy towards Latin America. The Trump administration has been horrendous with trying to overthrow the government of Venezuela, imposing new sanctions on Cuba, supporting the coup in Bolivia, the right-wing strongman in Brazil, and on and on. And so we need a radically different policy towards Latin America. Would I rather fight for one under a Biden administration that might want to go back to some of the positive legacy of Obama in improving relations with Cuba, for example, and in some better policies towards Latin America, not good ones? Yes, I would much rather do that. And so we've been doing the same kind of thing around different areas of the world. We did one around Israel-Palestine, not that Biden will be better on that front, but we did one around all foreign policy in general. And I think that at least we have ways to influence a Biden administration. We have no ways to influence a Trump administration, nobody in the State Department to go to, nobody in the White House to go to. And his policies are so much on a whim that we just can't, we can't, as a grassroots movement, even get anything that we could hang on to for trying to push him in one direction or another.
Question on that front. So when Joe Biden tweets out to the right of Donald Trump on issues of like Iran, on issues of Venezuela, that doesn't give you pause about those items? And just for another point, under the Obama administration, they were still undermining and toppling governments in Latin America. I mean, I made the point where Hillary Clinton references in her book that they took the guy out of his pajamas and tried to argue that that was not a coup that was backed by the United States. Obama expanded 7 wars. I mean, you're talking about Libya, which was just utter destruction that the media gives them a pass on. Syria, where they admit 500,000 people were killed in the instigation and propagation of that war. And not to mention the shadow wars taking place in other parts of Africa with U.S. troops killing or in some cases being killed. Trump hasn't started any new wars.
The most catastrophic war going on right now is the war in Yemen. Yes, it was started by Obama at the end of his term, but he realized it was not a good thing, and he tried to pull back. The Trump administration came in and has used the veto veto pieces of legislation, war powers resolutions, to stop the U.S. involvement in that war. Now, those resolutions have been passed by overwhelming number of Democrats and a good number of Republicans joining in.
I guess, Medea, the point that I'm trying to make here is that Obama sat in the room, greenlit that war because he thought it was going to somehow hamper the Iran nuclear deal, and he wanted to keep the Saudis on his side. So he greenlit the war. He knew it was going to be bloody. He knew. Wait. Hold on 1 second. 1 second.
Do you think Biden would veto a bill that came to his desk signed by both houses of Congress?
No, what I think would happen is that the Democrats wouldn't sign on to it in general if it was Biden. Meaning, in the same way that Obama greenlit that war and that nobody cared about it because it was Obama, they start caring about it when it was under Trump. I'm making the point that under Biden, he may do it now just because of all of the attention that's been given to it. But the attention that's been given to it by Democrats is explicitly related to the fact that it's Trump, not because of the war.
Do you give Obama any credit for the Iran nuclear deal?
1,000% yes.
Okay, and that's super important, the most important foreign policy decision that he made during his time. And with Trump ripping up that deal, he has caused the conflict to just spread throughout the Middle East. So having Biden in, and Biden is not coming out to the right of Trump on Iran.
Yes, he is. Yes, he is. Yes, he is. Have you seen, when Biden is asked about renewing the JCPOA, what has his answer been?
He says, we will go back in, but Iran has to comply.
But Iran was already complying.
Right.
I guess I'm making the point that the going back in part.
That's not what Trump says. Trump never says we will go back in. Oh, come on. If you're, I am opposed to so many of the things that Biden stands for in the foreign policy. But if you're saying that that Biden is to the right of Trump on Iran, that's just not right.
Well, no. What I'm trying to say is Trump is trying to destroy Iran. I agree with you. But Biden was supposedly part of the administration that was a part of the JCPOA. And look, this is one of those things that I applauded Obama on because the alternate to that at that point was war. That's the way these guys were looking at it from a foreign policy standpoint. What I'm making the point is that Joe Biden didn't seem to even understand or grasp what that was. I mean, and going in, basically Joe Biden just needs to deal with the agreement itself. I'm saying something different. I'm saying that, yes, the JCPOA was a foreign policy bright spot in regards to Obama and the years that they were trying to do it. I'm saying also, however, that the chaos in that region was sprawled out by the Obama and that Democratic administration. And that does one thing negate 500,000 people dying, or for that matter, initiating all of this stuff with Venezuela saying that they're a national security interest of the United States. I'm making the point that does one thing justify all of the other rivers of blood that was at the exposure of Obama. You can buy a black slave right now in Libya based on what Obama was doing in that region. So it's like, yes, I accept the bright spot. But when I look at the Yemen war and the bloodshed that was there, starvation, the famine used in the sense of war, when I look at the 500,000 dead in Syria, not to mention the sanctions that are still in that country now, and when I look at Libya and them selling slaves, I say, yes, that bill is a bright spot within the context of everything else Obama has killed or was responsible for the death of a lot of people. That's the way I look at it. And I say for all of Trump's faults, if we're looking at it specifically from the sense of foreign policy, as horrible as I think he is on these countries and everything else, I can't say that he started a war, nor can I say he has that much dead or blood on his hands.
He hasn't ended a war, even though he has made some attempts to do it. He hasn't done it. His biggest outreach, which I applauded, to Kim Jong-un in North Korea, didn't go anywhere because he wouldn't contemplate signing a peace treaty or lifting some of the sanctions that would have given North Korea an incentive to keep negotiating. He's increased the brutal sanctions that now cover a third of humanity, using them more than any other president has. He has threatened Venezuela in a way that includes not only these sanctions, but putting a bounty on the head of Nicolas Maduro. He has revved up this Cold War with China, and he has bragged about building up the military again, including a ridiculous new branch of the military called the Space Force, given more money to the military than before. And he has pulled the U.S. out of all kinds of international agreements. We talked about the Iran nuclear deal, but the treaties with Russia on nuclear weapons.
Wait, my dear, let's get back to that when we come to it, because I agree with you on all of this. I'm not a fan of Trump, even though I'm making an argument to the left of on this. Let's talk about it when we come back. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're here with Medea Benjamin from Code Pink. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com. By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality, to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, when I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind: color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik. Fault Lines.
And we're back. Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're talking with Medea Benjamin, co-founder of Code Pink. You can check that org out, by the way. Just go to codepink.org. That is about as self-definitional. It defines itself. That's my point. Medea, thank you for joining us. Having a conversation in that last segment about Trump, Biden, the 2020 election. We like I mentioned as I introed you, we've been talking about this back and forth for a while during the course of the show. One of the other sides of this that we actually haven't gotten into yet in this conversation, you guys were going back and forth on specifically Biden versus Trump, but there's also this conversation on any given election cycle. We've had you as a guest on the show before. I'm guessing I know where you're going to come down on this. In any given election cycle, you're probably not advocating that people just vote blue. I think you're saying that in 2020 right now, going up against Trump specifically, his policies, I think he's sort of seen as the worst of the worst. We could argue that, but I don't even care to. We might get into it, but really, it's just I think that's the case you're making. Am I right? I don't think you're making a case that the Democrats should be the sole party for progressives. And I think, as you mentioned as you came in, you're also pushing for alternatives like the Green Party, like the People's Party potentially. I just wanted to clarify that. What's your take on that, Medea?
Absolutely. I consider the 2 major parties war parties. I look around the world and see countries that have a robust system where there are many parties, or even one party that looks out more for the benefit of its people than our 2 parties do. And I say that our system is broken, that we need a radical change. And let's see, who knows how we're going to get that radical change. Might it be supporting a Bernie Sanders candidacy and building up a new cadre of people who want to see socialist change in this country? Maybe. I support that. Might it be supporting the Green Party and trying to build that up? Yes, let's support that. And might it be creating something totally new that excites a lot of young people to say we need to start from the bottom up and create something which excites people because it incorporates all of the movements that they've been working on. Yes. So I support all of those ways to try to transform our political and economic system.
And one thing, actually, maybe we can come back. I just wanted to get that in there because I don't think, again, we covered that. You when you came in, I felt like you were clear about that. But then it might have been muddied. And so just going into the second segment, I wanted to get back into that.
Joe Biden.
Well, no. And it happens this way. This is one of Jamarl's issues. And so, this happened with Chris Smalls. Chris Smalls, we had on also a speaker at the People's Party convention this weekend, organizer of the Amazon workers' strike there over COVID, the spread of COVID in Amazon warehouses. Anyway, we had him on, and this became the conversation too. It's just how it happens. It wasn't intentional. But it's a valuable conversation to have. There are a couple different sides of it we could have too. We could talk about this issue of quote unquote voter shaming. Some people, some progressives who aren't voting for Biden feel like some people who are voting for Biden are pressuring them. That's a kind of consistent theme here. I don't feel like your want is to pressure people though. So maybe we could talk about that. Another side of this is actually, we haven't talked about it yet. We've gone over foreign policy to Trump v. Biden. We haven't gone over domestic policy. We haven't talked about the protests. We haven't talked about Kenosha, what happened in LA on Monday, any of this stuff. The BLM protests or COVID for that matter. We could, but maybe let's just go back to the first one for a second.
Well, I certainly don't shame people on who they're voting for. I know people who just throw up their hands and say, I don't vote. I don't believe in the system and I'm not going to participate. I respect people's decisions as long as they've thought about it. I get shamed because I say that I'm going to vote for Biden. I don't think that's right. I think we should understand that we have come to different conclusions through probably a very similar process on trying to figure out, how do we get change? And our conclusions are different ones, but I absolutely respect them. I wish that our system were different, where we had ranked choice voting and you could vote for your favorite and your second favorite. But we don't have that at the national level. We should be getting that, but we don't have it, and we have this horrible electoral system that makes our elections even more ridiculous. But yes, whatever decision people make, I respect it.
I appreciate that. Yeah, and I think that can be easily lost, especially if people have ideas. I mean, that just plays into this general, wider divide, the wider polarization. But that's good to hear. And also, you're right. Ranked choice voting over first past the post, some kind of reform like that would be good. It seems like what's happening with this specific conversation is there are two conflicts going on. There's a conflict between Democrats and Republicans, or between people on the left and Trump in 2020. And at the same time, there's a conflict between the Democratic Party and the progressive movement. And those conflicts are coming to a head. And we're seeing the sort of trifecta of players arguing this stuff out. I'm just glad that we have you on, because you're pretty calm. You're passionate, but also dispassionate when it comes to some of the harder to talk about stuff. Adia, so thank you. Anyway, what's your take on Kenosha protesting and Trump's response to this? I don't think we've had you on to talk about that in the past couple of weeks.
Well, my fear is that in these horrific police killings that just keep happening, including the latest one in Los Angeles, that people righteously rise up in anger, and then the Republicans take advantage of this by saying, look, there's chaos, and we need a strong man to tamp this down. He acts like he's not in charge now. It's sort of like, put me in charge and I'll send in the National Guard or the federal police, which he's not allowed to do. And he blames it all on happening on Democratic cities. And so I feel that it unfortunately works to strengthen his base. And of course, what it works to do is create a race war in this country, and potentially a civil war.
The Civil War part is interesting to me because, I think it creates a spiral to the bottom. And for me, I kind of look at it, I think, in the way that you do, where it's like, well, look, there's a primary cause. The primary cause gets ignored because that primary cause is not necessarily something that bothers or even a large portion of the country sees. And it explodes, and you have right-wingers who get the affirmation almost of the president to go and inflame it, bringing in weapons, which is going to, of course, have the response where more weapons are brought in defense. It creates a spiral. But I don't see any solution to that from the standpoint of a voting booth. I don't. And that's kind of the issue here, right? Let me ask you something else. And this is going to trend on the voting thing to some degree. For years, so let's say like 40 years, we've had candidates, black, white, everything in between, Democrats, who people voted for. And oftentimes the argument, an excuse that was made was, we got to keep the monsters at bay, and the monsters are in the other party. So you got to vote Democrats. At least that was the argument for blacks. You had another one for Hispanics. You had another one for, let's say, the poor. And they would make a similar argument, though. And the party would accept those votes, and they would move further and further and further and further to the right. So over the course of time, what looked like a pragmatic vote in that one moment now looks monstrous when you're standing with a Donald Trump as a president of the United States, as many people left the party thinking that my vote doesn't matter. I'm being, it's like what I vote for is not necessarily being returned in material conditions. The people in Kenosha and in Wisconsin, if you look at the poverty rate, if you look at the neighborhoods, meaning the number of neighborhoods that are black, most of those are in prisons or jails. If you look at the unemployment rate, I think it's like 4 times that of whites. And this was, under both administrations. It didn't matter who you voted for. That still was the picture of Kenosha, Wisconsin. If that's the case, honestly, if that's what you end up with, where it didn't seem to, your vote, however you put that vote out, because you were so irrelevant in the process that they did what they did, knowing that you were going to vote for them regardless. Doesn't it help at some point to say no and to balk? Because if you have outcomes like this and you end up with political situations that becomes a fire in your country, chaos, and I'm looking at it now where you have a presidency and there is neither candidate that has a way out to that. They don't even speak about what you're talking about. You're talking about, look, those are horrible conditions these people are living in. Neither candidate speaks that way. Both candidates speak law and order. There's no voting solution to this. Am I wrong in that? Like, I look at this and I think, oh, this is horrendous. Neither candidate speaks to this very specific issue in any real, tangible way that will make this issue different or go away.
Well, I think you're wrong about it in the sense that that is just one tool that we use. And the change happens when you have a strong enough grassroots movement. Now, there are times in our history where a strong grassroots movement has forced a more conservative, even a Republican president, to do good things. But if you look at the majority of times, it's been under a more liberal administration, but with a strong grassroots movement that has forced the change onto that administration and onto that Congress. I know if you look at where people have Congress, people who are more progressive, the progressive folks have a much more of a possibility of influencing their votes. They go and do sit-ins at the home of a more progressive candidate or elected official, and they are much more likely to get a positive outcome. If it's a conservative, does say, I'm not going to even bother because I know he doesn't listen to us at all. So if you take it from the standpoint of when we don't get change, it's because we're not strong enough as a movement, then our focus is on building the movement. Yes, we vote. We vote for local officials, and I think we have a lot more influence over our local officials when we get city councils or mayors who are